let's talk about Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. So this is, well, how do I put it? It's 7 chapters, which are basically novelettes from the 60s, 2 were published as novelettes. It's a bit of a fix-up in that sense. It's 280 pages long in this edition, Sci-Fi Masterworks reprint. But what is it about? What kind of book is it? What's the plot? Well, it's hard to explain without spoiling. It's hard to know what to say this is this kind of book. The first couple of lines are pretty famous and well loved, and they give some of the flavour. His followers called him Maha Samatman and said he was a god. He preferred to drop the Maha and the Atman, however, and called himself Sam. He never claimed to be a god, but then he never claimed not to be a god. There's something there about the story, the themes, and the style, I think, all in those couple of lines that really sums up something important. Basically, this is what I'd say without spoiling. On another world, so it's obviously another world, it's not Earth, somehow there is a version of the Hindu caste and ritual system with gods who are active in the world that people meet who are very powerful, and all of that seems to be real. In that world, one immortal is brought back from the digital cloud, basically, to continue resistance to the gods that he opposes, the system they have, and that is Sam, who you and that's not a spoiler. That's very early into the first chapter that you pick up pretty much all those details. In fact, I suppose the detail about him coming back from the digital cloud is dropped in the very first sort of prologue-y, epigraphy paragraph. The book is hard to describe in detail beyond that. That's what basically the story is about. It's hard to describe beyond that because chapter 1 happens after chapters 2 to 6, and you read chapters 2 to 6 largely to discover what on earth is going on in chapter 1, the background to this crazy, incredible, rich world. It's a journey of discovery through events that have come up before that and that come up after that, and that's a significant part of the enjoyment. It's a densely structured book. That's a positive thing, I would say, in this case, but it does make it hard to explain. But basically, this is one of the best sci-fi novels I've ever read, I would say, so I'm going to try to explain some of why that is. I mean, I say it's a sci-fi novel, it's actually a fantasy novel, or it's both. Zelazny wrote about the idea that he'd actually tried to leave it not open, but kind of open. The style he adopts is very much a fantasy writing style, even though it seems to be a sci-fi novel by any other standard. And there's lots of tricks he does to that, partly the way he describes stuff, a kind of epic, poetic styling. But also things like you can see here at the start of chapter 1, and it's the same for each chapter. You have an italicized paragraph of some events that have happened in the world, and then a quote from a Hindu or Buddhist scripture. So there's always this sense of multiple things going on in terms of genre. It's a blend in real terms. In formal terms, it is a sci-fi novel, but it has some of these tropes, these rhetorical and technical tropes from fantasy. So the first thing to say is that the novel spins a lot of different plates. It's 2 genres, and it wants to talk about big ideas, and it wants to present a rich and textured world, and it pulls all of those off, I think, and more. So look, the characters are fun. Sam is the most obvious one to consider. He's the one with the most detail on the whole. He's funny, he's clever, resourceful, he's dedicated to his plans. The way he tries to accomplish his plans is always entertaining, and there's a degree of the magician's prestige in how he pulls stuff off. But he's also a layered character. His real motives and morals are always up for debate, particularly by Sam himself. But other characters, even relatively minor ones, are very satisfying too. There's a character called Shugata who doesn't come in for very long. He's not actually a god either, but he's maybe the most moving of all the characters. The real story behind a god called Niriti, the Black One, with his zombie hordes, is a great reveal. These are satisfying things you discover about the way in which the real backstory to the world links into what's happened since, which links into the philosophies that these characters espouse. And you do get a couple of good talking head moments where people just say, this is what I think, this is what I value, that both shows their character and explores the world. And the world building is, for me, it's some of the best world building on a pocket scale. You know, we're not talking about a big book, we're talking about 280 pages of you know, moderate sized type. But it's very good at doing all of that in a pocket format, like I say. The environments are enchanting. The atmosphere of each location that they visit is palpable. Anywhere they spend any decent amount of time, you really do get the sense it's a real place in a real world. The world as a whole makes sense. The magic system, which in some ways, I mean, whatever it is a magic system, it's a technology system, it's both, perhaps. It's very intriguing. And the way that, this is one of those things where it's hard not to be vague, so I'm just going to be vague. The way that the non-human species involved are dealt with is very satisfying and rich. Great world building. And it's fair to say this world building largely succeeds because of the evocative and rich prose of Zelazny. Zelazny is, I think, one of the best, perhaps the best, pure writer of that generation of new wave sci-fi writers. When he writes about the cities in the world that you're visiting, or in the heavens where the gods live, or the emotional life of his characters, whatever it is, he's constantly convincing. He's lush, he's witty. I'm just almost wanting to open up at random and say, and read something, particularly a descriptive bit, because he's very good at describing locations. And yeah, there were times when he saw not through the eyes of the body that had once been his, but he saw as a demon saw, in all directions, and stripped flesh and bone from those among whom he passed, to behold the flames of their beings, coloured with the hues and shades of their passions, flickering with avarice and lust and envy, darting with greed and hunger, smouldering with hate, waning with fear and waning with fear and pain. His hell was a many-coloured place, somewhat mitigated only by the cold blue blaze of a scholar's intellect, the white light of a dying monk, the rose halo of a noble lady who fled his sight, and the dancing simple colours of children at play. You don't need to know what that's about at all to see this immediate emotional reality of that more or less randomly picked passage. So his prose is very good. And finally, this is an ideas book. It is not an ideas book like Gene Wolfe, you know, when you read Fifth Head of Cerberus or Book of the New Earth. It's not a Neil Stephenson novel, and it's not a whatever other ideas novelist you want to think about. But in its own quiet way, it really does want to think through some questions. What is the real person? And it does have debates about those in a way that is an ideas book trope. Is the real person the body, the soul, another thing? Neither of those. What do past relationships mean for our present and future selves? How does the past, the emotional or physical past, connect to who we are now? What really is science? What really is faith and magic and things that we often see as non-scientific? It questions those boundaries, and not in the ways we'd expect, not strictly in an Arthur C. Clarke sense. Is scientific progress an unmitigated good? This thing, again, without spoiling, I think it's interesting that both sides get their say in that debate, even if you are generally speaking led to agree with one. And all of these ideas are compellingly explored. And if I had to list quibbles, you know, it's right to give a rounded review. More or less the only thing I came away from it with, other than having to adjust to the time shifts between chapters, maybe the only thing is that I think the last part, I just wanted to be a bit longer. Maybe I felt it was hurried, but maybe not hurried. I kind of wanted 5% more. I wanted just a tiny bit more, a few more pages of, I wanted this character arc to be fleshed out more. I wanted to dwell in this part of the world longer and to know what was going on here. It felt occasionally like things to happen suddenly, but the pacing did seem fine. It was basically right, and so I'm not sure I'd want to say, wow, Zelazny screwed that up, he has to fix it. You know, if for this to be a perfect novel, he should have done better. This is a very good novel, and I recommend it. I think it's one of the best sci-fi novels ever. If you've read it, what did you think? Tell me in the comments, or tell me some of your favourite sci-fi novels. Until next time.